Hey everybody, my name is Steven and welcome back to the Storytime channel. Without wasting any time, let's get into our stories of the day. My dad says he'll pick me up at dark? Well, he hasn't picked me up, so it must not be dark. This happened about 10 years ago and I have a good chuckle about it every time I pass the place in my car. I'm a pretty meek guy, so this is probably the only rebellious thing I did in my entire teenage life. My dad owns a farm, and being his son, this meant I had a job when I was a kid whether I liked it or not. Mostly I understood this, but that didn't mean I had to like it. I resented having to spend entire days of summer vacation, dawn to dusk, in a tractor when it came time to harvest alfalfa, which we did around 4 times between spring and fall. Basically, imagine a teenager with ADHD forced to sit in one place for 14 hours, and you'll understand how it felt. Honestly, if I wasn't a total introvert, I might have snapped sooner. So anyway, it's the second day of harvest and it's getting to be late in the afternoon. I've spent about 20 hours total in a hay bind by this point over the past few days, and I ask my dad which fields to cut next. And I ask him when I'll be done, hoping, in vain, that I can leave and go play video games or whatever. This is where the titular line comes in, "I'll pick you up at dark." Little does he know that my little teenage heart is clenching with righteous anger for all this wasted, paid time. So several hours passed and I'm understandably getting pretty irritable. It starts getting dark and, guess what? No sign of my dad. At the time, it was becoming a bit of a recurring joke in my family about how my dad was always late, so I knew I was in for the long haul. Then it occurred to me, and the malicious compliance begins. My dad said he'd pick me up at dark, and he wasn't picking me up, so that must mean it wasn't dark yet. And what don't you need if it's not dark outside? That's right, headlights. So I continue going back and forth on this wide, empty field, squinting as the light continues to fade after sunset, and stubbornly refuse to turn on the headlights. I can easily see the edges of the field, of course, but everything else is blending in pretty well. I start purposely and accidentally leaving some shark fins, which are what we call mistakes that haybind operators leave between rows when they don't get any alfalfa. A few small shark fins per field are fine, even expected, but these are on a whole nother level. My dad shows up after about 30 minutes of total darkness. I forget our exact conversation, but I do remember the result. After asking me why I didn't turn on my lights and me telling him why, he laughed uproariously, and I still remember it fondly to this day. I never did get any punishment. I'm not even sure he understood the extent of the missed alfalfa. It was dark after all, and it was hard to see in the dim moonlight, but whatever, it was just a few rows. I, however, like to think he was a little proud of me, because I was the type of teenager that never got into mischief. I asked him about it recently, and unfortunately he has no memory of the incident. Oh well. I, however, will probably remember this little bit of malicious compliance fondly for the rest of my life. It might have been pretty insignificant and motivated by laziness, but it was also the first time I really stood up for myself against an authority figure. So if you were being told that you would be picked up at dark, and it was obviously already dark and you knew he wasn't coming right away, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments section down below. Write with blood if I have to? Fine. This happened to a classmate of mine and I was lucky enough to witness it. A couple of years ago in high school, we were going to take a regular exam for a class I don't remember. The exam was right after our recess. Unlucky for us, the teacher that would supervise us during the exam was one of the worst teachers most of us have ever seen. The teacher was also a sub, coming from another high school where teachers could abuse students as much as they liked. My high school had a much higher pay than hers, so she wanted to be a good sub and get hired as a full-time staff. Let's call my friend as Frank and the teacher as Karen. We sat down, attendance taken, and Karen gave us the green light to start the exam. Suddenly, Frank says "darn it," which gets the attention of Karen, and the following conversation ensues. Frank says, "Ma'am, my pencil is broken." He was using a mechanical pencil. "Can I get one from a friend?" Karen says, "No, you can't. I told everyone before the exam I would not allow pencil or eraser swapping. You should have checked it." She said this during our recess time, so unless you came 6 to 7 minutes early, you wouldn't know it. Frank says it was working. It got broken when I was solving the first question. Look, I even wrote my name with it. I don't care, not my problem. So what am I supposed to do then? I told you I don't care. Write with blood if you have to. At this point, there is a small silence, and Karen has a small smile on her face, thinking she has won over a high school student and satisfied her ego. In my high school, we had 2 vice principals, and one of them would be checking every exam room at the beginning of an exam to make sure everything is okay. Attendance, missing exam sheets, etc. And we had glass class walls so you could see outside pretty easily. Frank spotting, the vice principal is about to enter the classroom. Frank says, "Ma'am, can I get up to take a pin from the pin board?" We had one in every classroom. What? Why? Frank waits for a few seconds for the vice principal to enter. When she enters, Frank says, "You told me to write in blood if I have to. Since you don't let me borrow a pencil from a friend and I don't want to get a 0 from this exam, I would like to get a pin to put a hole in my finger to write with my blood." Vice principal is shook, looking horrified and just frozen. "What are you talking about, Frank?" Frank says, "Ma'am, my pencil got broken during the first question. I asked permission from Karen to borrow a pencil from my classmates, but she said I can't. She doesn't care what I do and that I can use my blood if I want to. So I wanted to use my blood to write and not get a 0 on the exam." Vice principal looks at the class with a puzzled face as we all nodded our heads confirming Frank, and some even say he is right, ma'am. Vice principal looks mad but won't say anything during an exam in front of an entire class. "Frank, take a pencil from your friend. Of course you can't use your blood to write in any case. If anyone else needs, they can also borrow pencils or erasers." Vice principal storms off the class as Karen throws a death glare to Frank. We learn a couple weeks later that vice principal tore Karen a new one for being so stupid. Karen was overall a very bad teacher and had a ton of complaints about her within just a semester. At the end, she was sent away 1 week before the semester ended. We were already done with the curriculum, so there was no missed material, and, of course, she wasn't hired as a full-time staff. Beautiful timing by Frank here. I love the knowledge that a higher authority figure would walk in, and that he'd be able to call his teacher flat out on her BS. A customer gets frozen milk, eggs, and cheese. First, a little backstory. I work as a delivery driver for a store. People order groceries and the store collects them, and I deliver them. We have 5 cars driving on a typical day, and every car has a freezer and a cooling unit on the roof. When people order, they can add a message to the driver. Today, I had a customer, and I got the feeling that he is a giant a-hole from the way he complained in the message that the food wasn't cold enough last time. Our cars stay around 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. The customer stated that everything that is cold has to go in the freezer. So, in the freezer they went, negative 20 degrees Celsius. At this point, I should mention that he was the last delivery. His food was in the freezer for around 1.5 hours. When I arrived at his house, I checked if the items were frozen. Yes, they were. Milks weren't fully frozen, but enough that you couldn't drink them. I started to unload the bags on his door. He asked why 3 of the grocery bags were cold. I told him that he asked them to be in the freezer. I was right the whole time. He was, and probably still is, an a-hole. Then he just starts ranting about how I should know what he meant and swearing pretty much. I show him the printed receipt that stated that every item that has to be cool, I have to put them in the freezer. Then I thanked him and told him to have a good day with the biggest smile I could. He let out a little grunt and closed the door. I could hear him swearing through the door. Then I gleefully walked to my car and went back to the store. He had already called there and complained. The worker who answered the phone told him the same thing I said. You asked for it and you got it. What is the problem? If he hadn't been so rude in the message, I would have just put his stuff in the back and make sure they are as cold as possible. For those of you who think this was a little extreme, the message contained only very rude orders and slandering of my colleagues. If the message is obviously rude and argumentative, and they said literally, if anything is cold, put it in the freezer, then I don't think anything's wrong when OP put anything that was needed to be cold in the freezer. No, I won't do your part in our group project. In my university, most of the lessons don't have an attendance requirement, and they upload the video recording of the lecture and lecture notes to the school system. When I have questions, I prefer to send an email or give a visit to the professor at his/her office hours. So I see no reason to physically attend the lessons. The only downside is that I rarely know the other students taking the same lesson. This becomes a problem in some courses when there is a mandatory group project. That means you're not even able to upload the project to the school system unless you choose your group members. I always end up with the other people who have nothing to do with the school and do absolutely nothing to help with the project. After multiple projects which I had to do other people's parts, I had enough. And that's where our malicious compliance begins. In one of the hardest courses in our department, we had a massive 6-people project which was 40% of our total grade. Now, to pass the course, you had to take a minimum of 50%. That means with a good project, you can almost guarantee that you can pass the course. With a minimum grade, but this is still a big deal since on average, people take this course 3 times before passing it. We had 2 months to finish this project, and for the first 2 weeks, I emailed, messaged, called my team members about the project, but they always had some excuse about why they can't join the meetings and why they can't talk right now. So, in the end, I separated our roles in the project and sent them an email showing who was responsible for what. I finished my part in the project rather quickly and I started to wait. A week before the deadline, my group members noticed that this time, nobody did their part. There was chaos, they were panicking, and they were angry. Group was filled with messages like why nobody did the project and what they were going to do now. I was enjoying reading their angry and desperate messages, but of course, I am not heartless, so I explained to them what they should do and how they can do it. I even sent them some links to tutorials and example projects similar to ours. With enough effort, there was still enough time to do something decent. Time was passing and they were getting even more desperate, but they were still doing nothing. Some of them called me and tried to arrange meetings, but I gave the exact same excuses they gave me a month ago and told them I already finished my part so they don't have to worry about me. They tried to convince me to help, but every time I said I would love to help, but insert one of the excuses that person gave me before, so I can't help. Last day of the deadline, I asked them to send me to the part they did, which they responded with they will try to send something in a couple of days. Now, there is a 10% punishment for each day past the deadline. So I said no, I am sending it today, so send me the part you completed. Realizing they are going to get a 0, they insisted that for my part I write their name too. I simply answered with no, smiley face, and I ignored the rest of the messages they wrote. A couple hours before the deadline, I sent the project with a documentations explaining the project and who did which part. Now, 10% of the project's grade was sending a working project, so I was waiting for a maximum of 90 out of 100, but I was also worried because 80% of the project was missing, and perhaps professor can decide to give zeros to everyone. But luckily, this didn't happen and I actually got 90 points, while my other team members got one big juicy 0. I think OP is completely justified. This is a project worth 40% of your grade in a college course, and nobody can be bothered to do anything besides one person? I wouldn't give them any credit either. You can use one flashcard on the test. I recently found this subreddit and think it is splendid. It reminded me of something I did freshman year. I have always been a lazy human. Not the lazy that causes other people to hate for not working on a group project. More of the work smarter, not harder kind of lazy. Anyways, it was the end of freshman year, finals were coming and teachers were laying out the requirements. My English teacher was giving us a test on all 240 vocabulary words for the final. It was going to make up a considerable portion of the grade. Anyways, she said that we could use the front and back of one flashcard. So I had an idea. I didn't know too many of the words, so I decided to just use the flashcard. Most kids had like 8 words in the card if they even bothered to fill it out at all, but not me. Let me say that it would be challenging for anyone to get me to work as long and as hard as I did on that card. First, I got my ruler and made about 30 lines 1 millimeter apart from one another. Then I took a word list and alphabetized it. I then wrote next to the word the closest matching synonym that I knew next to it. I used the lines to fill in my smallest handwriting possible, every single word. Anyways, I showed a couple of people and they were angry at my loophole and said I was going to get in trouble. Nope. Easiest 100% ever. I still have the note card, and I have just temporarily made it my profile pic. This was 4 years ago just for reference. Honestly, if I was the teacher and I saw a kid walk in with that card, I wouldn't have shut them down for writing 240 words on a little flashcard. Taking a break outside the office was frowned upon. Taking it inside, however, development position, team of 2, one day, boss comes to my desk. We need to talk about your working hours. Huh? Why? You've been missing a lot of time lately. That can't be true. I used to come at hour and leave at hour plus 8, plus 1 hour for lunch. We go to check it out, and it turns out that most of that time is for bathroom breaks, and a few times I left to walk around the office and refresh myself. Bathroom breaks? Are you aware that I have irritable bowel syndrome, right? Yeah, but company policy says we are allowed 13 minutes per day. I'll try to talk with HR, but can't promise anything. And about the breaks outside the office. Are you aware that I'm quite stressed because I'm lifting most of the weight of the project and needed to refresh myself, right? Yeah, but that's company policy. Are you also aware that I don't take most of the breaks everyone else takes, right? Yeah, but that's company policy. So in the 4/6 months that I had left, as I was already looking for something else but in a more lazy way, my workday started with 1 or 2 hours of listening to a podcast on my station, then a 45-minute break inside the office for fruit and reading a book, then 1 hour of actual work, lunch pause. Oh, but I'm having lunch inside. The system automatically adds 45 minutes for lunch if you don't leave, unless I actually leave the office building after lunch. Then 2 hours of work. Then in the evening, a fruit and read break inside the office. Then 1 hour or so of work in a personal project and read documentation and technical stuff. The best part is that they really didn't notice a drop in productivity on my side. And all because the new boss wanted an Excel with numbers. Well, he got it, and one less developer. It's company policy that you can't be productive if you're stepping outside, but if you're taking lots more breaks inside, that's very productive, is basically what this amounts to. But with that being said, that's all the stories we have for today. So what I want to know is, which of these stories was your personal favorite and why? Let me know which story was your personal favorite in the comment section down below. And thank you all so very much for watching and listening to the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing and don't forget to turn notifications on so you'll never miss an upcoming video from the Storytime channel. Thank you all again for watching and listening to today's stories on the Storytime channel.